It is so likewise with evil things. Small acts of dishonesty, small acts of an immoral nature, small outbursts of anger can grow into great and terrible things. Said President Brigham Young to the congregation, Brother Thomas B. Marsh, formerly the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, has come to us after an absence of nearly 19 years. He is on the stand today and wishes to make a few remarks to the congregation. He came into my office and wished to know whether I could be reconciled to him and whether there could be a reconciliation between himself and the Church of the living God. He reflected for a moment and said, I am reconciled to the church, but I want to know whether the church can be reconciled to me. He is here, said President Young, and I want him to say what he may wish to. Brethren and sisters, I now introduce to you Brother Thomas B. Marsh. When the Quorum of the 12 was first organized, he was appointed to be their president. Brother Marsh rose to the rather crude pulpit. This man, who was named the first president of the Council of 12 Apostles, and to whom the Lord had spoken in so marvelous a manner, as recorded in section 112 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which I wish you'd read. He said to the people, and now I quote Brother Marsh, I do not know that I can make all this vast congregation hear and understand me. My voice was never very strong, but it has been very much weakened of late years by the afflicting rod of Jehovah. He loved me too much to let me go without whipping. I have seen the hand of the Lord in the chastisement which I have received. I have seen and known that it has proved he loved me. For if he had not cared anything about me, he would not have taken me by the arm and given me such a shaking. If there are any among this people who should ever apostatize and do as I have done, prepare your backs for a good whipping, if you are such as the Lord loves. But if you will take my advice, you will stand by the authorities. But if you go away and the Lord loves you as much as he did me, he will whip you back again. Many have said unto me, he continued, how is it that a man like you, who understood so much of the revelations of God as recorded in the book of Doctrine and Covenants, should fall away? I told them not to feel too secure, but to take heed lest they should fall. For I had no scruples in my mind as to the possibility of men falling away. He continued, I can say in reference to the Quorum of the 12 to which I belonged, that I did not consider myself a whit behind any of them. And I suppose that others had the same opinion, but let no one feel too secure. For before you think of it, your steps will slide. You will not then think nor feel for a moment as you did before you lost the Spirit of Christ. For when men apostatize, they are left to grovel in the dark, speaking in a voice that was difficult to hear, and appearing as an old man when he was actually only 57 or 58 years of age. He spoke of the travails through which he had passed before he had finally made his way to the valley of the Great Salt Lake and asked that he might be baptized again into the church. I wondered as I read that story, so filled with pathos, what had brought him to this sorry state. I discovered it in the Journal of Discourses, in a talk given to the saints in this same Bowery the year before by George A. Smith. I think if you bear with me for a minute or two, it is worth the telling to illustrate to all of us the need to be careful in dealing with small matters which can lead to great consequences. According to the account given by George A. Smith, while the saints were in far west Missouri, the wife of Thomas B. Marsh, then president of the 12, and Sister Harris concluded they would exchange milk in order to make a little larger cheese than they otherwise could. To be sure to have justice done, it was agreed that they should not save the strippings to themselves, but that the milk and strippings should all go together. Now, for you who've never been on a farm around a cow, I should say that the strippings came at the end of the milking and were richer in cream. Mrs. Harris, it appeared, was faithful to the agreement and carried to Mrs. Marsh the milk and strippings. But Mrs. Marsh, wishing to make some extra good cheese, saved a pint of strippings from each cow and sent Mrs. Harris the milk without the strippings. A quarrel arose, and the matter was referred to the home teachers. They found Mrs. Marsh guilty of failure to keep her agreement. She and her husband were upset. An appeal was taken from the teacher to the bishop, and a regular church trial was had. President Marsh did not consider that the bishop had done him and his lady justice, for they, that is, the bishop's court, decided that the strippings were wrongfully saved and that the woman had violated her promise. Marsh immediately took an appeal to the High Council, who investigated the question with much patience. And, says George A. Smith, I assure you they were a grave body. Marsh, being extremely anxious to maintain the character of his wife, made a desperate defense, but the High Council finally confirmed the bishop's decision. Marsh, not being satisfied, took an appeal to the First Presidency of the church, and Joseph and his counselors had to sit upon the case, and they approved the decision of the High Council. This little affair, Brother Smith continues, kicked up a considerable breeze, and Thomas B. Marsh then declared that he would sustain the character of his wife even if he had to go to hell for it. The then president of the 12 apostles, the man who should have been the first to do justice and cause reparation to be made for wrong committed by any member of his family, took that position. And what next? He went before the magistrate and swore that the Mormons were hostile toward the state of Missouri. The affidavit brought from the government of Missouri an exterminating order, which drove some 15,000 saints from their homes and habitations, and some thousands perished through the suffering, the exposure consequent on this state of affairs. So, such is the account of the occurrence by George A. Smith.
I believe most of us are familiar with the sad account of Thomas B. Marsh and his wife Elizabeth. Brother Marsh was one of the first modern-day apostles called after the church was restored to the earth. He eventually became president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. While the saints were in far west Missouri, Elizabeth Marsh, Thomas's wife, and her friend, Sister Harris, decided they would exchange milk in order to make more cheese than they otherwise could. To be certain all was done fairly, they agreed that they should not save what were called the strippings, but that the milk and strippings should all go together. Strippings came at the end of the milking and were richer in cream. Sister Harris was faithful to the agreement, but Sister Marsh, desiring to make some especially delicious cheese, saved a pint of strippings from each cow and sent Sister Harris the milk with no strippings. This caused the two women to quarrel. When they could not settle their differences, the matter was referred to the home teachers to settle. They found Elizabeth Marsh guilty of failure to keep her agreement. She and her husband were upset with the decision, and the matter was then referred to the bishop for a church trial. The bishop's court decided that the strippings were wrongfully saved, and Sister Marsh had violated her covenant with Sister Harris. Thomas Marsh appealed to the High Council, and the men comprising this council confirmed the bishop's decision. He then appealed to the First Presidency of the church. Joseph Smith and his counselors considered the case and upheld the decision to the High Council. Elder Thomas B. Marsh, who sided with his wife through all of this, became angrier with each successive decision. So angry, in fact, that he went before a magistrate and swore that the Mormons were hostile toward the state of Missouri. His affidavit led to, or at least was a factor, in Governor Lilburn Boggs' cruel extermination order, which resulted in over 15,000 saints being driven from their homes with all the terrible suffering and consequent death that followed. All of this occurred because of a disagreement over the exchange of milk and cream.
Travis went good, so as you can tell, I've got an allergy eye infection that I woke up with this morning. Lots of fun. I was going to check, and I didn't. Hope the camera doesn't freeze on me while I do this. Also sore and weak and tired. It's just another day for you and me. Nope. So today the church will be lying to women worldwide about the Relief Society. I just go to the Joseph Smith papers, the minutes, and you'll see that this church has been lying to you. It's not me. All I do is read and understand what I read. When Joseph Smith says, hey, you can organize it just like our priesthood, and if you want, you can have deacons and teachers, etc. It's up to you. Is that not priesthood office? Why then is the church saying that women are not allowed to have priesthood office from Jesus? Because apparently this ain't Joseph's church. No duh. And yet they lie to us and say it is Joseph's church. But it's not Joseph's church. But it is. But it isn't. And Mormons stay Mormon. And so on must join and pay tithing to LDS Church or die, which I don't think I spoke. I think that was just a little clips of Nelson and Hinckley and stuff I just assembled together. But Intignia says, how can you say such a thing? Thou shalt not lie. I'm not lying. They're not lying. They're going to murder you. It's them. Why do people blame me for what the prophets say? Dear God. It's not complicated, Mormons, and yet you make it so complicated just so that you can accuse other people of wondering why you're still Mormon. It makes you the enemy. So, one thing Mormons can agree on is that Joseph Smith was prophesied anciently. I can even say in the premortal council of heaven that Joseph Smith was foreordained to come to earth at the particular time he did to restore the church. Mormons wouldn't have a problem with that. They wouldn't call me a liar for saying that. But if I were to tell Mormons that Joseph Smith was prophesied in the ancient scripture in the learning of the Jews, they'd be confused. They wouldn't quite understand. But they wouldn't be suspicious. They'd be curious. So the Jews also testify of Joseph Smith? Yep. Okay. Yep, the Great Spirit. Whatever. Yeah, the Jews have a Messiah ben Joseph. And that's from 2 Nephi chapter 3, verse 5. Messiah ben Joseph. From the fruit of the loins of Joseph of Egypt comes Joseph, son of Joseph. That's Messiah ben Joseph in the learning of the Jews. But if I were to go further and say to the Jews, Messiah ben Joseph is a Christ. Oh, no, 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 no. Only Jesus is Christ. And that's where Mormons draw the line. They will not cross into full-on learning of the Jews, despite 1 Nephi chapter 1, verse 2. And so, as a result, Mormons, therefore, are incapable of comprehending and understanding who their actual Christ for the latter days is. And it's in that very same passage. Because, after talking about the need for the coming of Messiah ben Joseph, it's so that the covenants of the Lord might be remembered for the coming in the latter days of Messiah ben David. If you're going, huh? Matthew. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David. Oh, okay, as long as it's Jesus. He comes after Joseph Smith. He doesn't come before. He comes after. And the Mormons can't handle that. There are only two churches, Mormons. And the church has been leading you astray. And even Cook recently, in which he's telling the missionaries in the MTC about the gathering. But the Jews were the original religion for writing the scriptures that we now have as the Bible, plus many others that were rejected by Constantine's creation of Christianity and Jesus as the Christ. Constantine's Christianity is the great and abominable church. Christianity, Jesus, is the great and abominable Christ of the great and abominable Christian church that replaced the Jews. And so the Jews were living in the Roman period, and prior to that was the Greeks, and prior to that was the Persians, and prior to that was Babylon, Prior to that was Assyria. Prior to that was Egypt. That's as far back as we go, because Egypt is the source of religion. All humanity under the umbrella of anthropology. And so as they migrated out of Egypt many millennia ago, they carried with them the religion of Egypt. But as they changed the language, the names got changed, the story names and places got changed to tailor to their new cultural and geographical environment. With the new governments and the new economy and the structure of religion with the language. But they were still the same. And so I've been able to trace back Jupiter as Rome, Zeus is Greek, and then you have Yah as Hebrew, and then Amun is Egyptian. And then, there's Marduk from Babylon, and as Esther or Ishtar is Isis, the wife of Osiris. But I've been able to trace them all the way back to Egypt. It's all the same religion. Thus, all of the myths, as they're incorrectly called, are prophecies that the Jews are writing about in their scriptures, as it's now post-captivity Babylonian mixed with Hellenization of Greek, and now mixing it with Roman. And so you see a lot of Roman cultural practices in the scriptural books for that very reason, because that's what the author knows. And so we can trace the origin of the documents to the particular culture that was the first one to develop those specific cultural traits and circumstances that make it unique. And so, for example, temple prostitution was also had among the Greeks. But the Romans added male sacral prostitution. And so where you see the story in Genesis of Sodom, as the men come to invite the messengers to join them in their temple rituals, that reveals that the book of Genesis was written during the Roman period time, not the Greek period time, where Tamar, is it 38 or 48? The story of Tamar that everybody is taboo to even read, and I'm surprised Spencer W. Kimball didn't staple that shut. No inspiration here whatsoever. Move along. But Tamar, in order to get Judah to fulfill the law, has to make him believe that she is a temple prostitute. And thus, she's able to force him to obey the law, to take care of her, as is required in the law. And too many people look beyond the mark and call her a whore, and not understanding what was being done there. But that, in and of itself, suggests that it could be Greek, but when you throw in Sodom and Gomorrah in there, you realize, nope, it's Roman period time, not Greek. And so thus, prior to, no, you didn't have that. Because you got to know when certain things were started, when certain objects were invented, when certain things were used, and otherwise scholars make the rookie error of causing an anachronism And I see too much of it from other scholars such that I can't rely on anybody else. When I'm doing research, I have to do primary research myself now. Very frustrating. And so, Messiah ben David is named Emmanuel. He's the man like Moses from Deuteronomy 18:15 through 19. He's the Jewish Christ. And the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith both repeatedly affirm, yep, he's the Mormon Christ too. And so he's the one who comes in the latter days after Joseph Smith. 2 Nephi chapter 3, verse 5. And so as a kid, I would read over the Doctrine and Covenants and get to the part in section 85 of One Mighty and Strong, and it didn't associate it with Jesus, and so I thought, oh, a Mormon. I wonder who it will be. Would it be me? You know, I'm a little kid. Joseph Smith is prophesied. I wonder if I'm prophesied too. And I'd read about a man like Moses, and I'm realizing that this is a human being. This isn't Jesus. That there's some man who's going to be the prophet, because I was able to associate it with section 107, verse 91, that the keys of the president of the church are the keys of Moses. And so yes, the church is lying to you when they say it's the keys of Peter for the president of the church. Everything they do and say is a lie. But as a kid, I'm unable to do the research and obtain the research I need, and not realizing yet that I would have to do my own pioneer research. And so, as I'm learning line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, I'm starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together and dismissing ones that are obviously incorrect, the interpretations. And so one of the things that was beneficial for you guys is to know that the Jews and the Egyptians, from which the Jews got it from, were writing prophecies. They were predicting the future and gave revelations, which were the day and times of those prophesied events in the future. But in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the prophets, seers, and revelators, along with the president of the church, have not demonstrated any of the gifts of prophecy, revelation, or seership. And they never claimed translator, but all Mormons automatically input it into the equation. And it just goes in one ear out the other that they are never called translators. And so that's why every video after conference or during conference I bring that up with the sustaining. They never do. I keep checking. Keep wondering, will Nelson be a translator this conference? Nope. Will Jesus finally ascend? Nope. And that troubled me as a kid, Because the church claims that they're the rightful succession from Joseph Smith, and Joseph Smith is our founder, and Joseph Smith clearly had prophecies where he's predicting the future. He had revelations where he was giving days and times. And he was a seer, giving us visions and dreams. What did you think the visionary accounts were? That is him as a seer. And Joseph Fielding Smith Sr. never intended to have any of his journal canonized, but that's why we have his one dream put in as scripture. I guess the church was desperate for anything to show that they're true, even though his son never demonstrated any of those gifts. And unfortunately, that vision or dream is wrong. October 3rd, 1918, Salt Lake City. Let's check. That was right before he died. Because what do you mean forbidden? It's not forbidden. Oh, you are pissing me off. Bastards. Being attacked on my birthday. I found out that power outage, it was exclusive. I got a phone call from Rocky Mountain Power asking for my help in any investigation as to why it occurred. Really? It's an all-out ban today. Alright. That's disturbing. It's not a forbidden thing. This is an anti-Semitic attack. I'll have to go with time and date. To the long way. Long way home. It's on Thursday. Suckett was the week before. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, so no Jewish connection. November 19th was when he died. Next month. On his deathbed. He died of the virus back in that day that everybody was talking about in 2020. And so, did God smite him down for lying in his journal? See, he says he's reflecting on the great atoning sacrifice that was made by the Son of God for the redemption of the world. The testimony of Jesus. So yeah, he was lying. But it was his journal. And so this is a false prophecy. It's a false vision. And I could go over and explain dreams for you, that this was his knowledge. That's all he knew. And so thus his dreams are a reflection of his interpretation of the religion. That's why he saw what he saw. So for example, I saw Jesus on a cross during the hours of darkness, and saw Jesus in the Holy of Holies in the Salt Lake Temple, all his glory. I also saw Hinckley as he gave me the key card to his office. I also saw Monson in my dreams, where I was returning his boots, and he said, "No, you go ahead and keep them. These boots are made for walking." Whose bed have your boots been under? And so, all prophecies are necessary to be fulfilled in order to be that guy. If you do not fulfill all those prophecies, you are not that guy. You are a fraud. You are an imposter, and we can judge you and dismiss you. But you got to use the learning of the Jews. Because if you use Christian and say, well, his name's got to be Jesus. Wrong. It's Emmanuel. That's his name. Any other name, you're not him. Sorry, Muhammad, you're not him. Sorry, Constantine, you're not him. Sorry, Jesus, you're not him. The author of Matthew makes that very clear. He's quoting Isaiah that says the prophesied name is Emmanuel, and the author of Matthew says, so we named him Jesus. Different name meanings, not the same. And so people don't understand this. That when I talk about how the prophets are not prophets, seers, revelators, translators, and have the wrong keys to be the president of the church, Mormons are easily offended. And they jump to the attack to defend the church, only revealing that they're stupid. And they get mad when you call them stupid. But if you believe that Joseph Smith was prophesied, why is it that complicated to then go, then there must be a Mormon who is supposed to be, other eyes itching, the prophecy of the scriptures as well? And I've tried to help over the years. Section 107, verse 3, verses 16 to 17. You're supposed to put in every single story of the Jews, and thus Romans or Greeks, back to the Egyptians. put in the modern equivalents that Joseph Smith tells you to do. So the protagonist is always the latter-day Christ, unless it's talking about Joseph. But there's often a dualism involved. And so the antagonist, Brigham Young or Nelson. You did catch on, right? This is how easy it is to interpret Scripture correctly, knowing that it is about Mormons. And you can throw in Constantine, Catholic Church, and Christianity, and even Islam, because, yes, there are only two churches. The ancient religions, which were all the same, they just had different languages, different prophecies for the name of their Christ. But Constantine is the other church. He called all of the ancient religions heretical and pagan and therefore wrong, and said he's now the one true church. And Jesus is going to be the name of the Christ. And so he's not the fulfillment. He fails, because they turn the prophecies into literal histories. And once you do that, none of the characters are the fulfillment. But if the learning of the Jews was maintained, yes, they're all types and shadow symbolism of the latter-day Christ. And so there isn't a second coming, there's the first coming. It's referred to again because of Messiah ben Joseph, who was prophesied to be assassinated. And sure enough, Joseph was. And so it would have been nice all these years to spend my time doing videos going over the scriptures and how it's to be understood and interpreted. But because of the unbelief of Mormons, I've not been able to do so. There's only a handful of people that believe and want to know that information. The majority of Mormons want to continue to believe a false idol god named Jesus and enforce their religious beliefs with all kinds of abominations. It's the great and abominable church. Of course Mormons are going to respond this way. With all their hate, with all their death threats, with all the cyber terrorism. Right before my birthday. I told you this was going to happen. It happens every single year since I sued the church during the Exodus year to let Mormons go. Nelson said no through his compromised justices here in Utah. They got away with their crimes. And they've increased the burden upon Mormons as a result. And so, that's what you're supposed to be looking for. A man like Moses. What did Moses do? He sued to free the people. People are Mormons. And then there was creeping death. Stars falling from heaven. The waters parted. That really was cool. It surprised me. Didn't know I had it in me. Because I knew that it was a symbolic prophecy of birth or rebirth or the inundation of the Nile or creation. I knew all the various translations. I didn't know it was going to actually also be real. And I was mocked. Until it happened. Fox 13 News, Utah. That blew me away. And so, yeah, it would have been nice to go into further detail about the actual birth, nativity, and where he moves, so that you can track him, to learn about him. Go over his mother and his father and his brother, which last year I found out also got included in prophecy. Because of the great and abominable church. Good job, Fox. Good job. Having a PhD does not mean you're smart. Deciphering Paleo-Hebrew means you're smart, regardless of what degrees you have. Because if you can decipher an ancient language that nobody else has deciphered, you've learned how to learn, and you don't need a degree. Unfortunately, those who get degrees keep reinforcing that you have to trust only those who get degrees. As they keep the lies among themselves. So, well, I probably should cover this. Since it is the birthday. In Deuteronomy 19, after talking about the Jewish Christ and the false prophet, starting in verse 20 of 18, the author goes into a discussion about what to do with false accusers. If a false witness rise up against any man to testify against him that which is wrong, verse 16, then both men, between whom the controversy is, shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges, which shall be in those days. And the judges shall make diligent inquisition, and behold, if the witness be a false witness, and hath testified falsely against his brother, then ye shall do unto him as he had thought to have done unto his brother. So if you falsely accuse somebody of a capital crime, you then are punished with the capital punishment. That's why it says eye for eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand. Because if you accuse somebody falsely, and the punishment is taking out their eye, or taking out their tooth, or taking out their hand, you get punished with that. Thus, it's supposed to be intended to prevent people from lying in court. And so Mormons who claim that Jesus is the Christ are lying. And too often, Mormons, with their ignorance, they lie and then issue a punishment for me, a threat. And what they're doing is pulling a beam in the moat with their false accusation, because they're the ones who are actually guilty of what they're falsely accusing me of. And their death penalty is actually what is prophesied to happen to Mormons by the Great and Abominable Church. That's the sad situation that I'm faced with, is that I'm trying to save Mormons' lives, and all Mormons are doing are expediting their doom. They don't care to know the truth. And they're just full of lies and hate and violence. And so when Brigham Young got his Danites to threaten key Mormons, remove them from presidencies, Thomas B. Marsh in particular, Brigham Young falsely accused Thomas B. Marsh of apostasy and wrote a letter to him telling him to return on the 17th of March, 1839, for his excommunication. Having lied, he left because of the threat of the Danites. And Brigham Young said it was apostasy to not side with the Danites. And I don't understand why ex-FOMOs can't figure that out. They've read Oliver Cowdery's pamphlet Defense, but they can't catch on that it was Brigham Young, not Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was in Liberty Jail, and yet Hinckley and Monson talk about Thomas B. Marsh. I'm going to find those, put those clips in. Because those prophets lied. That's the Danite lie. And it's historically documented that Thomas B. Marsh left because of the threat of the Danites in 1838. That's when the Joseph Smith history was written. And Joseph Smith did not put the name of the church as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That was Willard Richards after Joseph died, because that visionary account eventually got published in 1842 in the Times and Seasons. No Jesus. And so, yeah, these Danites were the cause of overthrowing Joseph's church and changing it to Christian with Jesus. Real easy to figure out. Just got to put all the pieces together. Nobody did. And so, yes, by claiming authority that he then went on to claim made him the successor of the church, that false accusation is now the punishment for Brigham Young. That the future Christ is to be the president of the church, not Brigham or any of his successors. So Nelson is not the legitimate president. On keys, first of all. And so if Nelson were to ever die, Oakes would automatically be the president. But, knowing the truth, I know that Oakes is not authoritative. He has no authority to lead the church. And everybody should be afraid of Oakes becoming president. He's the one who's denied that women were given priesthood and priesthood office by Joseph in March 17th, 1842. He said a number of other abominations and is the one who's whispering into the ear of Nelson to make all of Nelson's changes that have taken place over Nelson's term of office. And so Joseph Smith, knowing of the birth date, that's why the 17th of March, 1842, was for the women, because women give birth to babies. And right after he became a Master Mason. But the Relief Society was necessary because women and men both needed to be endowed, both needed to have priesthood, because men and women have babies. You can't have Messiah Ben, son of David, without it. And that's why Hiram's wife was told to go with Brigham, which technically Hebrew. And thus Joseph Fielding Smith Sr. was the abomination that he became. But he did a first presidency statement addressing critics who left the church, claiming that they were the one mighty and strong, and that Joseph Fielding Smith was verse 8, saying that he has no clue what it means. That, was it Parley P. Pratt? Repented, and therefore the prophecy is null and void. W. Phelps. Well, and so the book of the law is mentioned here. But when Nelson rushed the book of the law right before Thanksgiving last year, they did not make this connection. They instead said, Section 119, it's proven. Really? Yeah, proven Danite. Good job. Thank you. Because the church is lying to us. Everything they do is a lie. There is nothing that they are saying that is the truth. Because they're not using the learning of the Jews. So section 119 is on tithing, priestcraft, violation of the Book of Mormon. This is a Danite record. This is what Brigham practiced in 1844, which was why he had it published in 1844's edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. After Joseph died, all of a sudden it appears. And it violates the Book of Mormon. And so only the Danites know that they are replacing Joseph Smith and lying about Joseph Smith to other Mormons. This is how evil these Danites are. They knowingly, maliciously lie for the sole purpose of deceiving innocent, illiterate, dumb people and turning them into evil Danites to embrace the lies. I saw this as a kid with the bullies. This is exactly what bullies did. And this is exactly how the church has been treating me. Exactly like the Danites treated Joseph Smith. And still to this day, Mormons treat me like their ancestor Danites did, and treat Joseph Smith still to this day as the Danites did. And Mormons who leave because they're offended with these lies, how dare Joseph Smith be a polygamist? This is awful and abominable. I'm out. Oops. Ex-FOMOs believe the Danite lies. And they're spreading those lies all over social media. And so Mormons, they say, yeah, because he's a prophet of Jesus. We're the one true church. That's why. No. You have to conform and comply to the Book of Mormon, the keystone of our religion. If you don't, you're false. It's wrong. It doesn't conform to the Book of Mormon. Jesus does not conform to the Book of Mormon. Jesus is a fraud. He's the great and abominable church, Christ. It's a real simple thing to do. Mormons can't do it, and they won't do it. Church has to be true at all costs. So they lie. And I hope it's not knowingly lying, but I am well aware that there are Mormons who are knowingly lying. And so, yeah, if these Danites win and get their way, all is lost. There will be no Zion. There will be no place of safety, refuge, and peace. So, yeah, St. Patrick's is also another that unbelievable cyber attack on the Jewish calendar. That is just so wrong. So St. Patrick lived in the 400s. 100 years after Constantine created Christianity. And so, no, there were no snakes in Ireland for him to chase out. That was a result of the 17th was his death date. And he was 120 years old in 492 or 493, which is an interesting thing to use the death date for the birth date prophecy of the future Christ, because the legends come from I do not have this painting. I'm seeing Columbanus is writing a letter to Pope Boniface IV around 613. Tirchan and Merechu, if I'm pronouncing those right, were using the Druids as the enemy. Ireland was well known to be a land without snakes, as this was noted as early as 3rd century by Galeus Julius Solinus. Hilarious. Yeah, they're comparing him to Moses and Aaron by using the snakes, but should have looked for it first before. But these stories or legends came from the Druids themselves. So thus those two guys were turning on the Druids who gave the information about St. Patrick to another writer. So now that's modern theories. But regardless, these Druids did not reveal their name. It was a hidden name. And when they finally did branch out from their Druid tribe out into the world where they needed to have a name, they used a translation of the name rather than the actual name. Sun God. These Druids were sun worshippers of the sun god, and thus Emmanuel, the sun god at noonday. And it was through them, fruit of the loins, that the prophesied Messiah would come. Because Druids were pre-Christianity, and thus of the right religion, not the abominable one. Like Islam, as Muhammad claims to be a branch off of Christianity, and now the one true Christianity, also replacing the Jews, claiming that he went to the top of the mountain to receive the Quran. Because this is 600 when Islam got founded to be a terrorist organization to convert people with the sword. And so, yeah, the snakes tying to the serpent staff of Moses, serpents, the battle of dragons, that all has to do with the prophecies of the Christ in the latter days. And so thus, the death of St. Patrick is the prophecy of his birth. Because his birth is to fulfill the prophecies of Revelation 19 on April 2024, the last day of the Jewish calendar, which apparently is now under cyber anti-Semitic attack. And it could just be me. But, you know, and so Joseph Smith likewise knew that that was going to be the date. So, I'm pretty much done. It's just one of those days, and the attacks just will not stop.